Hey guys, I'm usually Dave from the Digital Soup Podcast, a proud member of the Gonna Geek Network, just like the show you're listening to right now. The opinions expressed are those of each individual host. Check out all the other podcasts at gonnageek.com and get ready because geekiness begins in 3, 2, 1.
Ding, ding, ding! Welcome to episode 141 of Better Podcasting, brother. It's where we discuss what it's like when you get in technical trouble.
Oh yeah! In this week's Better Podcasting download, we go over podcast suggestions from an avid listener.
And finally, in this week's Better Podback, we have someone who was swindled with dynamic ad insertion, just like I was robbed for the last heavyweight belt. Woo!
Lauren, start the show now. I can smell what The Rock is cooking. And it's bacon. Canadian bacon.
Welcome to Better Podcasting, a show where we talk about podcast tips, tools, and best practices to help you succeed with your podcast. What makes us different? Well, just like you, we podcast purely out of the love and fun of it. Podcasting is our hobby, and we recognize that it's yours too. We always encourage your questions and feedback, and you can find all of our contact information at betterpodcasting.com. Here's your host for the show, Stephen John Drew and Stargate Pioneer.
Welcome to episode 141 of Better Podcasting. I am Stephen John Drew, the official representative of Canada, and joining me is the official representative of Australia, Stargate Pioneer.
Whoa, 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 Australia? Come on, man. There's no need to build a wall in Australia. It's its own continent, right? There's no wall around us. Americans need a wall between us and Canada. What we start with every week is a how I saved my podcast story or a how I could have saved my podcast story. But this week we have a how I saved my podcast story because we have an email from listener Anthony Sitko, and he begins his email and he says, "Hello, Stephen and SP. I'm Anthony Sitko, co-host of the Capes on the Couch, a podcast that examines the mental health and psychiatric issues of comic book characters." Quick plug for our site, capesonthecouch.live. A few weeks ago, we did an episode centered around the god of mischief, Loki. We recorded an entire hour plus on Loki. When it came time to edit the episode, however, there was a terrible buzzing sound throughout 40% of the episode. There were several good parts that were ruined because it sounded like my co-host and I were speaking through a beehive. What wasn't ruined, however, was our usual skit at the end of the episode, wherein my co-host, a board-certified psychiatrist, and I roleplay what it'd be like for the character of the week to have an actual therapy session. So we released just the skit with our apologies for ruined audio, and we re-recorded the entire episode and released it the following week with a new skit. Since then, we've replaced all of our audio equipment, and we haven't had a problem yet. Knock on wood. Love the show, and I hope you can do an episode on learning how to address those little sounds your mouth makes while speaking. Lip smacks, tongue licking, etc. Those are a pain to edit out when they happen. Haha. Keep up the great work, Anthony.
Oh, that is quite the challenge. I remember the first time I recorded a podcast in a beehive. Oh, it was so noisy, so loud. The fun fact was that I just ended up using some of that wasp and bee killer and took care of the whole nest.
Why were you recording from a bee? Did Ant-Man minimize you? Is that what happened?
I heard the acoustics were supposed to be really good.
I bet you they are, actually, with all that baffling and everything. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So Anthony Psycho is said that he's run into problems with his equipment and lip smacks and stuff like that. Well, first of all, we advocate using a dynamic cardioid microphone. So that's going to help you a little bit. And if you use the equipment that we generally recommend, starting with like a Samsung Q2U or an Audio-Technica ATR 2100 or 2005, that's going to be your great starter microphone. We use the Studio Broadcast large diameter dynamic cardioid microphones, and they're even better, but you can make do with basically the handheld dynamic cardioid microphones. So that will get you part of the way, and then test your equipment and then monitor as you're recording. I actually am monitoring from my H6 right now, so I'm hearing what my recorder is actually recording. And that's something that a lot of people don't do. They don't monitor what they're actually recording, because a lot of people are recording into their computers with USB devices and with USB microphones, and they're not really understanding what's coming out. So that's the first part of what I would do. Stephen, what's the first part of what you would do here?
I agree. I think monitoring, checking things out is a really good way to go. There is, of course, it's never future proof with technologies because, or 100% proof, I should say, just because the fact that you can potentially with digital equipment have a hum that is recorded somewhere that you're not actually hearing if it's not routing the signal properly. Theoretically, your headphone monitor could hear it fine, but the actual data being recorded to the card could potentially be damaged, but the odds of that are fairly slim. So definitely listening is a really good way to go. The other thing as well to do is feel free to re-record. It is what it is. It's not as spontaneous as the first time around, but I definitely say that if it's a situation like that and you think that it is so unsalvageable, re-record. But there are some decent processors that will remove some of that. But the thing is that buzz is usually there every time someone is speaking. But sometimes you can drop certain EQ bands and isolate where that buzz is and remove it. But it's still generally there. But you might be able to make it salvageable. So it's not your usual quality, but it is something.
General troubleshooting techniques are involved here. Like if you're hearing that sort of thing, I'd start with unplugging one cable at a time and seeing if I could actually get the cable that is the offending thing, or maybe I have to put a ground loop isolator in the system somewhere, stuff like that. That's where you have to remove those sort of things. Or you can do what Anthony did here on Capes of the Couch and just buy a whole new setup. I mean, that could be, if you're using equipment that we don't recommend that you podcast with, that could be the issue right there. The other thing that he said at the end here is lip smacking, tongue licking, etc. And they are a pain to edit out. Yes, in some cases you can't edit them out because they're integrated with the sound that's going on. So to get rid of that, first of all, proper microphone position. You want to have your microphone about 4 to 6 inches away, which is basically a hand distance away or 4 fingers away. You want to have your microphone at about a 45-degree angle so you're not having plosives going into it. And you want to turn the gain up enough so that it hears your voice, but maybe not the breath sounds behind it or the lip smacking and that sort of thing. And another reason that might be in there, and I'm not sure, I don't know what equipment you have, Anthony, but it could be that you're using condenser microphones. And because those condenser microphone diaphragms are so good to pick up sounds, you might be getting those sounds. So the best thing to do is if you have a microphone that can go to a cardioid pattern versus an omnidirectional pattern, that will help, as well as using the correct microphone technique and not cranking the gain way, way up. That's going to be a recipe for disaster. So those are my things. Stephen, you have anything to add?
Just that it's really odd to think of doing a podcast where you're licking all the time through the whole show. Very, very odd, very awkward way to podcast.
Especially if you're doing a therapy session with a psychiatrist.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and talk tech support. Here we go. We've talked before about how podcasting can be easy. We've also talked about how it can be a royal pain in the patootie. It can be technical, challenging, and honestly, sometimes just downright discouraging. Most people who have podcasts for a while will have various experiences with technical troubles. This will have happened at one point or another. It's part of the game. It's part of the fun of the game once you're past that hurdle, of course. But it is part of podcasting. And today, we're going to talk a little bit about when you need to call help for these problems. Sure, sometimes you can go ahead and deal with these issues on your own, but other times you do need to call your help. And we're going to help you get help a little easier so that you can have your sanity back.
Sanity is very important when podcasting because it's so easy to lose your sanity while you're podcasting. After years of podcasting, you know what I'm talking about. So some examples of what we're talking about is maybe you're having some sort of issue with your website. Maybe it's a plugin. Maybe your website isn't picking up your podcast post automatically like it's supposed to. Maybe you're running into some sort of a service trouble. Like I use Ever to be a backup Skype recorder. So if I'm running into trouble with that, that is an example of what we're talking about. Maybe it's problems operating a product. I mean, we use OBS Studio and XSplit. Maybe you're having problems with that. Maybe you're having problems with your computer that are beyond your ability to diagnose what's going on. In a lot of cases, people think computers are magic black boxes and they don't know what's going on inside them. Some people think they know some things, but don't know everything. And something goes wrong with your computer and it could be a real hassle to try to figure out what's going on there. And another example is a major issue that you think can be repaired rather than replaced. Just like our example before and how I could have saved my podcast story. It could be your audio equipment, could be your computer, could be microphone. You never know. And maybe, as I alluded to before, it's something with your RSS feed. Like your RSS feed just completely stopped and nobody is picking up anything. So that's more than likely an RSS issue of whoever is hosting your RSS. Maybe you're self-hosting. Maybe you're going through a plugin like PowerPress. Maybe you're hosting through Podbean or Libsyn and your RSS feed has stopped working. So you need to figure out how to fix that. And this is another great example that we've had problems with in the past, not so much recently, but maybe your computer hears your audio fine, but your service that you're using to communicate over the internet, like Skype or like Hangouts on Air or something like that, and it doesn't hear the microphone. That's never happened to us, Stephen.
No, that's never ever happened. We've definitely not spent like an hour trying to diagnose that and run late getting our live recording going because of that.
Right before the podcast. Yeah.
So what's some general advice we have before you contact tech support? Well, the number one thing that we always say is, if you can, and the situation allows for it, is confirm a secondary source first of this. So if you're having a problem with something, message a friend, message Stargate Pioneer, send him those carrier pigeons we talked about last week. And, you know, a good example of this is if you can't access a website, you can always use something like downforeveryone or justme.com, which is an actual website where you can actually put in a website address and it'll tell you whether or not that website is responding or whether or not it is actually down. And if it's responding, then it's just you or a problem between you and that website. So it's always a good idea to confirm this with somebody. I've actually had this happen before with Stargate Pioneer, where he or I have seen something not work for us, and we've messaged the other, and the other has been like, yeah, it's fine. So it's always a good idea, because why would you want to waste tech support if it's something on your end?
Or a communication, like a server, web server, internet server in between you and the other person. Another thing that you could do would just be wait a short period and see if it's an interim issue. Sometimes downtime, either with a service or internet, could be interim. Sometimes it could just resolve itself. Like maybe you have something that is causing a ground in your electrical system that's powering your audio system. It might be intermittent, it might come and go, but at least for the podcast, maybe you can get it to go and it'll go away and your audio would actually resolve itself and you could go forth with recording your show or doing your live show like we do. And you need to consider if something has recently changed. Specifically, what we're talking about here is like with your computer, and if so, revert back if possible. And did you just post a new episode and now your RSS isn't working? I mean, that could be an example. Like maybe something in your episode post caused your RSS feed to go down. Maybe it's not the entire RSS.
Fun fact, seen that happen. Seen people put characters that can't be properly read by their host. They've put that into the description and it has broken the RSS feed or the application that they're using from pulling the episode. So absolutely that can happen. And, you know, if you've all of a sudden aren't having your latest episode go out, or your feed's having problems, yeah, just go pull down that most recent post, see if it starts working again, and that might help you diagnose. Hint, I've done that before.
This is all stuff that we've done before, as well as the next technical solution that we're going to talk about, which is swapping out if possible. Like if you're having a mic issue and you have a spare mic, you can swap to the spare. If it doesn't work, you confirm that it's not your microphone. If you happen to have a spare computer, like both Steven and I have mobile laptops that we use. And if it's something to do with our computer, we'll oftentimes go to our mobile computer and see if that will work instead. We'll be at a degraded capability to record the episode. But if it's our main computer, it's a way to record the episode with your mobile gear versus your main gear. So that's, if available, a way to go. And then if the support area has a database and you feel comfortable, do a quick search. Like if you're using a server like XSplit, there's an example. And if you have an issue, you can go to their FAQs and you can see if it's in there. You can go to a Facebook group and do a search to see if somebody else is having that issue as well. Community forums are the same way. Matter of fact, I think community forums are better because you have more of a ability to post long ranging issues there. And maybe you're having an issue that was actually described 6 months ago, but you're using your equipment in a different manner. So the issue is actually popping up for you and there's an easy fix. You haven't enacted it yet. So it's easy to actually fix that. Always use Google. There's a great thing to use, right? Search Google or Alta Vista or wherever you're searching, right? Search and see if somebody else is having the same issue. Actually, what I've found recently with Google searches, and I do Google search, is that I've actually typed the full phrase question in and I've gotten actual answers back with mostly community forums, but it's a great thing to do. And you don't even have to be a member of the community forum in a lot of cases. You just actually see the answer right there. And wouldn't you rather have the info right now, rather 24 hours from now? So by searching for yourself and finding readily available information on how to solve the situation by yourself, you actually save time and you might learn something about the equipment that you are currently using.
Also, if you are going to contact support, we actually have some tips for you as well. For example, we think that you should be very prepared with specifics. When did this problem start coming up for you? What have you done already to try to resolve it? And when was the last time that you saw the issue not exist? If you start off your ticket or your email with some of these details, if you've got a decent support agent, they're going to read that and that will help them sort of narrow in on the problem quicker rather than having to write you back and say, hey, could you tell me when did this first show up? And then you respond and then they go, hey, what happened to try to resolve it? And then you respond and it's just more and more time. So absolutely prepare yourself with those points.
And don't assume that whoever is responding to you will be able to fix the issue right away. Sometimes it might involve doing multiple tests and further diagnostics. I've actually run into an issue at work that's taken a week and a half to resolve. Finally figured it out this morning after a week and a half. I was very excited and felt a little not so smart when the answer came back, but at least it was resolved and it did take a week and a half. I've also recently asked a service on how I can purchase a digital movie for somebody else. And that is a day ago and I still haven't received the answer back. So don't think that you're going to get the answer back right away, even if it's a big service that has an active customer service technical support available. And they may even have to send you out something. It could be hardware and it could take a week, week and a half, depending on where you are in the world. It could be a couple of weeks. Like if they actually physically have to ship it overseas and has to go through customs, it could take a while to get to you.
One thing that can sometimes help you in a situation like this, especially as podcasters, because we're antsy, we're wanting our podcast working again, is look to see if there's a chat option available. I actually got to say, I'm surprised at how many podcast companies don't have a chat option available and still depend on the traditional support ticket. But, you know, there's some popping up. It is still a modern thing. More and more people are having this. And the nice thing about the chat option is that you're not waiting for them to get the ticket and then respond to the ticket. You're right there with somebody. Now, obviously, that agent is probably running a series of different chat windows, but it is something that a chat option can help keep it a little bit more interactive without the actual phone call and make it a little less send, wait.
Funny story, I usually start those chat options at about 11:30 p.m. at night. So the sleepies get me in between responses. And sometimes the chat window closes because my response time isn't all that great. Okay, it happens, right? Okay, so here's another thing. Just because you know about it doesn't mean you should ignore what they're saying. For example, the stereotypical have you turned your computer on sort of thing, or maybe you need to reboot the computer or something like that. They might assume they're asking you to reboot, but they might actually be asking you to provide details on a boot message, which you might have to write down because those are incredibly hard to capture, by the way. So just don't ignore everything. Make sure that you have full details to provide whoever is providing you that support.
Also, understand that the person dealing with you might not have all of the answers. There's often many layers to these technical organizations, and as such, they might have to actually do a little bit of research to get back to you. You know, if it's a big user-wide or system-wide problem, or maybe it's even a third-party problem, like maybe Amazon Web Services is having a problem, you can bet that there's going to be somebody up the food chain that's going to be involved. And so that's probably something that they're going to have to go report that and get information maybe from second level support, or maybe just from someone who has more keys to the kingdom.
Talking about more keys to the kingdom, don't accept substandard keys or service if you are paying for it. So, for example, if somebody kind of floats through the fix to the problem and they said they fixed it all, go ahead and reach back to them. But don't expect them to be miracle workers. And remember, they are people too. Not everybody is a complete expert at everything. Although you would assume that somebody would be an expert if they're working technical support, it might be the first week on the job and they just don't know everything. So be patient with them and then be prepared to elevate because you might need to get more expertise. And with all this, don't be afraid to admit defeat. Your ego is not that fragile, and it's okay. Somebody may know better than you. So be prepared that, Stephen, when you get the call from me, say, Stephen, I don't understand what's going on. And you say, stupid SP, turn on your H6, and then you can record the podcast.
Well, that's not entirely true. Okay, so let's do a little mock role play here. How it actually goes is you go ring, ring, and call me, okay? So
okay. Ring, 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 ring.
Oh, hello, Stephen's technical support.
Hey, Steven, it's SP, and I have a problem. My podcast isn't recording.
Oh, okay. Let me look into this for a moment. Pour the cup of coffee. Bill him hourly. Wait. Half hour goes by. Okay, I'm ready to help you. So, sorry, just had to lay that out there right now.
Somebody that has gamed the tech support service angle before, I see.
No, just taking your money, that's all.
Okay.
Other thing is, if you are going to go with that phone method that we spoke about, if you are going to go with the phone method, you should dedicate some time to that phone call. Yes, I know you're going to be on hold. You're probably going to be waiting for a while, but the reality is you can make the conversation a lot easier if you're not sitting there having to control your kids, control your dog, control your dogs from hurting your kids, all of this stuff. It's going to be a lot easier conversation if you can dedicate yourself to that phone call.
All right, since we've been talking about PC technical service or technical help, we need to state this. Unless you know this service organization and they are highly trusted, be cautious of allowing somebody to remote access your computer. And if somebody calls you and tells you there's a problem detective, definitely don't allow them. It's a scam. You generally have to call somebody and tell them something's wrong in order for that to happen. Nobody's going to remote automatically diagnose your computer, not in 2018. You think it would happen, but you don't want it to happen because all sorts of scams are going to happen.
SP, by the way, I forgot to tell you, I detected a problem with your credit card. Could you just read me those numbers and expiry? I just need to confirm things in my system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, don't give out personal information either, especially credit card information or bank information or your routing number, bank account, all that stuff, your social security number. The fact is, do not give out the personal information. Don't give a password if you can really avoid it. I know there's some cases where you do, but if you do, then change that password right away. after you're done with the technical support. So that is issues that can happen. And with your personal information, like if you give away your cat's name, your dog's name, what street you grew up on, your mother's middle name, that sort of information, they can use that to reset your password without you knowing. So just be very careful about that information. I know that there's some information out there. If you do have to give passwords out, you can use a password protector like LastPass, for example, that you can provide somebody limited access to your accounts using something like that. But that's a more advanced thing. In general, don't give your passwords out.
No. So for some actual resources that we wanted to talk about in regard to tech support, well, obviously the first one that we're going to recommend is the product itself. If you're having a problem with your podcast media host and you've done these steps that we spoke about, go and message them, talk to them directly. Don't go and plaster the internet with the question. Just file the ticket. It's not that hard.
Yeah, if you put a message on Reddit or Facebook or Twitter and expect somebody to get back to you, you don't know what the answers you're going to get back. You don't know that the person might not have a clue as to the tech support. You might be asking a question about Podbean, and the person that's responding is hosting with Spreaker or Libsyn. They might not, or maybe self-hosting. They might not know the back end panel of Podbean, and it's, well, my system does this, and they're the only ones to respond, so you're not going to get anywhere. So yeah, file those tickets with your podcast services because they're going to be able to be the ones to best help you. And if enough people have the same issue, they will fix the inherent issue. Maybe it's a user UI sort of thing. Maybe it's a bit of code that is specific to a certain way of using the system, but a lot of people actually use it that way. They can identify it and fix it in their next revision. So those are keys to making sure that you file the ticket with your service rather than going to your buddies who may or may not know what the heck they're talking about.
Of course, depending on the issue, you might not always be able to go to just one specific person. Like if you're having an actual hardware problem, the odds are there's multiple components. You might have to call in a third-party support team like some audio-video service or Tech Squad or any of these random people that do end up actually doing tech support for a living. So that's okay. Same idea, same principle applies. Make sure you're prepared with all those information when you do end up talking to this third-party support company. Of course, if those fail, you could, or maybe depending on the situation, you might want to actually prioritize this one. You could always just reach out to a friend, a colleague, a co-host.
And oftentimes I'll message Steven knowing that he's actually encountered the issue already because we've talked about it, but I just haven't actually enacted whatever is going on. So I'll know he'll know what to do. And it just shortcuts my learning curve on how to move things forward. But I generally don't bug him on things that I know he doesn't know how to fix. I mean, sometimes I might say, hey, have you ever had this happen? But if he hasn't, then I'll go file a ticket with the service because I want to get the issue resolved and I don't want to waste Steven's time. That's another thing too, by the way. You're wasting other people's time by asking them. And if they like giving you the customer support, even though they're not part of the system, then, you know, you're living off their generosity, basically. But that's life, right? You help people out when you can. I'm just saying that that's probably not the best option. I've seen it time and time again on Reddit, back when I was on Facebook and the Facebook groups. Those are the big places where people are asking these questions. It's like, why are you bugging everybody with this? It's who cares sort of thing.
So hopefully these tips will help make your support life a little bit better. And hopefully if you are a support agent, will have helped some people make your life a little bit better. But these are things to keep in mind. You're, again, going to have tech problems when you do end up podcasting. It's bound to happen. It happens for us on pretty much an hourly basis. I'm not lying. It happens all the time. And so if you have any suggestions for tech support, or maybe you have some recommendations as a tech support agent to get in touch with us, any of the ways, you can always reach us over on @BetterPod on Twitter. You can find us at facebook.com/betterpodcasting or email podcast@betterpodcasting.com. If you do want to send us an audio or video clip, you can always do that because we are a full video show, which you can always find at betterpodcasting.com and see our ugly mugs except we were slightly less ugly at the top of this show. But let's go ahead and get to the download before we talk about an interesting email that we got from someone.
Welcome to this week's Better Podcasting Download.
So there was another great message on Reddit, and I just couldn't let it go. Matter of fact, this was quite a few weeks ago that it came out, and it was on the podcast subreddit, not the podcasting, but the podcasts with an S subreddit. And it was posted by a listener who goes by Magna Bozo, and the title is Long, Some Thoughts About D&D Podcast. Now, the long was in brackets, just warning everybody that this was a long post. But this was such great advice that I wanted to go through it step by step. This is a listener. This is not a podcaster. This is a listener that has listened to quite a few D&Ds or gameplay, tabletop gameplay podcasts. And he has, and it is a he, I've confirmed, he has some things that he wants to impart to everybody, which I think are useful for most hobby podcasters. So basically, it's advice to people putting them together, them being podcasters. He said, this is based on my listening to a bunch of different D&D podcasts. Obviously, your mileage may vary. I always get that wrong. YMMV. So he says, when you're putting together a podcast, it should entail a little more thought than just, let's turn on the microphones while we play D&D. A normal D&D session stretches over hours, has friends involved, inside jokes, snacks, maybe maps and figurines, bathroom breaks, etc. A podcast is people listening while you supposedly entertain them. And this is in all caps. This means the podcast has to be interesting. This is from the listener's perspective, right? So the first bold statement that he has, and these are the main points, the bold statements, is be aware that you need to pack a lot in. He says, I was listening to one recently that used an established scenario where the first 4 or 5 half-hour episodes had the characters meet each other and be shepherded into a town by some fog and into a house where they found a crossbow or 2. I ditched it then. I gathered from the podcast descriptions that in another episode or 2, they were going to be attacked by an animated broom, and a few episodes after that, they would actually face a monster. Too late. All that should have been done in one episode. Things have to move right along. Your players can't be casual pursuing their sheets. Your DM, that's the game master, basically, or dungeon master in this case, can't be rummaging around to find a description. For that matter, the DM's scene setting and the player's role-playing need to be sharp and crisp, and the scenario itself has to be chock full of action and role-playing opportunities and conflict. An off-the-shelf open-world scenario might not be built that way. What he's saying here, Stephen, correct me if I'm wrong, is you have to condense what you are doing down to the interesting parts, basically doing a lot of editing.
Oh, shocking. Almost like those of us who are doing pre-thought of podcasts where we actually think of the main points. Shocking.
Right. And in gameplay, you can't do that in advance. I mean, the DM can write down, these are the important parts, and then whoever's editing the podcast can key into those important parts. But for the most part, you're doing an active gameplay with just a bunch of friends around a table. And this can go all over the place, as he stated before, and you're going to get side conversations all the time. I couldn't listen to that. I've listened to a couple of D&D podcasts like that, or tabletop role-playing games like that. I can't deal with them at all. Other podcasts, and I'll just throw this one out because it's on our network, Just One More Fix. When they do gameplays, and then they do instructional podcasts too, but when they do gameplays, they edit out most of the extraneous stuff. So it's action that's always moving. You're always interested in what's happening. Yes, you hear a little bit about what the choices are as part of the gameplay, but you don't look at a player's stats for half an hour and move ahead. So it's just one thing. You pack a lot in, make sure you're editing. So the second main bold point that he says is be aware that you have an audience. You're not just amusing yourself, you're supposed to be amusing your audience. In a D&D podcast by stand-up comics, the first weed joke was funny. Well, yeah, it's marijuana, ladies and gentlemen. The second and third, meh. By the sixth time, they went up to say, the chief of police asked them where they could score some good weed. Boring. which is the cardinal sin of podcasting. Limit the inside jokes with the other players. Your listeners don't have that background. Right, Steven?
Yeah, and this is a really good point that I think a lot of people who do things like play-by-plays is they forget about the fact that there's an audience, right? You know, it's that whole logic of, hey, we find ourselves funny. We should do a podcast. With this here, it's the same idea. We're having fun playing a game. Let's do a podcast about it. No, you gotta edit it a little bit and make sure that it still is letting the audience have that intimate touch with you.
Right. And the inside jokes, they're okay once in a while. I mean, if you span them out over an episode that is engaging but lasts an hour and a half or 2 hours, that's okay. But don't go back to the well 3, 4, or 5 times. It's cardinal sin of podcast. It's the cardinal sin of stand-up comics. Yes, going back to something, doing a callback is great, but it only works if you do it like once, right? And it's relevant to the subject. Okay. So the next bold point is be aware that you've got to keep your characters separate. Now, this is kind of important for all podcasters, so listen up. If there are 4 male players with similar voices and 1 female player, well, at least I know what her character is. But the others are difficult, and that lessens my interest. Maybe try doing a voice for your character. Low, high-pitched, old, G. Willikers, John Wayne, Rocky Balboa, Gravely Batman. You get the idea. That will help a listener know who's who. That was a great list, by the way. A pompous sounding character, while getting a little bit old quickly, at least stands out and has character. Does anybody play alignment anymore? Also, it might help to make a really brief description on each character. Old gnome mage, young elf druid, human barbarian, young halfling thief. Taking it to the extreme, McGillicuddy the mage, Defina the druid, Bonzo the barbarian, Thin Fingers the thief. Yeah, I know these are all pretty bogus and silly names, and they kill the magic, but the alliteration will help the listener remember who's who. Otherwise, it's just a mismatch. Stephen, how many times have you listened to any podcast with 3, 4 guys and you just don't know who's talking?
You know, I'll let a little inside track here. When we review the Gonna Geek Network applicants, half the time when I'm putting my review in, I'll say this person or the lead person or the first person that spoke, because I can't remember their names because they don't identify themselves well enough, or they all sound similar, or I'll just have to use vague generic terms because of the fact that it's not really clear who is taking each role. And I think that this would be something that would be even more important with a game podcast, because of the fact that there is so much happening, and it's not just listening to the one point that's being spoken, like on Better Podcasting here. It's listening to a whole bunch of things that are happening at the same time.
Right. So character differentiation, host differentiation, it's important in audio because you don't have those visual clues. Remember that. The next bold statement is be aware that your listeners are impatient. Maybe one of your characters can have a pace-setting characteristic, being impulsive or belligerent or defensive or something like that keeps the story moving. The DM of a podcast adventure shouldn't penalize the players too much for not thinking things through. It should almost be as if there's a chess clock where time is a precious resource and the DM and the players have to keep things moving. The intro at the beginning of every podcast can't be multiple minutes of mood-setting music. Ugh. Plus background on the characters, plus what's happened so far. How about 3 seconds of music, 10 seconds describing the characters in brief, and 10 seconds of the situation? At most, the listener can't easily skip past the intro. Don't force them to listen to a lot of that. Discussions of the mechanics or your character's backstory should be kept brief and in an episode 0 or in an intermediate episode like 3.5, 4.5, 5.5. It's okay to delve into this stuff in episodes that are set aside for it so that listeners can skip or at least know what they're getting themselves into. So the important part here is be aware that your listeners are impatient. Make sure that you're moving the information along. Stephen, how many times have we listened to a podcast that's applied to the network that has 2 minutes of music with no audio over it at all? So you're just listening to this music at the beginning. You're like, what the heck?
7,342, I believe.
And growing weekly. I get it. Music is cool. And if it's music that either you put together or you've gone out and bought, and you really like it, yeah, I get it that you like to hear it, but make sure there's some sort of voiceover with it to lead you through what's going on. And 2 minutes of that is too much. Now, I think that the 23 seconds that the article is saying here, that might be a little bit too short, but I think he's making a point to try to get everybody's shorter because they might be going on too long, 5-10 minutes or something like that. Maybe it starts out with, gee, Stephen, how's your day going? And it doesn't go into the story at all. Once again, I have got to point to Just One More Fix because they do an excellent job of this when they're doing their playthrough podcast. Go to Just One More Fix on the GonnaGeek.com network and you will listen to how they do it. And I think that's what is being talked about here. Okay, final major bold point. Technical issues matter. Get decent microphones. Nobody moves their chair or bangs the table during the podcast. Maybe take a break every 10 minutes. Having people play online from different sites is good because everything is done through audio and you have to keep the listener in mind. But it's difficult because people talk over each other. I appreciated episode 1 of a podcast where they apologized at the beginning for relatively poor sound. I get it. They couldn't exactly go back and re-record it. Foul language, it might turn some people off. And you know what? None of this matters if you're just recording for the heck of it. So you can listen to them yourself. Okay, before we get into the end there, let's go back to the technical issues. Stephen, this is what we've preached on Better Podcasting basically since episode 0. Make sure your audio sounds decent. I did like his deviation by saying if you're a few episodes in and you fixed your audio, you can't exactly go back to episode 1 and re-record it.
Yeah, and the other thing as well is, I think it's important to remember the parts that he says there about foul language, and not just necessarily the foul language, but the fact that some of the things that you do, that the crutches that you have when you end up speaking with your friends and whatnot, it might not necessarily translate for a podcast. And so sometimes you got to change a little bit if you are going to be turning your game into a podcast. You got to have that fun, but you got to remember, again, you have that audience and you want to make sure that you're respectful of that audience.
So once again, this is from a listener of gameplay through podcasts. He does have some background in audio, but he has a lot of experience listening to hundreds of audiobooks and different podcasts while he's commuting and everything. So he is trying to help out, like we do here on Better Podcasting, help out D&D podcasts, saying what you're doing, you could do it better. And these are the things to focus on. I thought this was an excellent post, and I am glad we had the opportunity to discuss it here.
Yeah, when you sent this over to me, I was really happy to see it because it was from a listener point of view. And so I think it's really worth us going through it because it shows that at least this listener pays attention to all of these things. And hopefully this will end up giving you a little bit of time or some things to reflect on with your show and think about maybe what you're doing really well or where you might be able to make some enhancements. For example, I'm going to work on trying to get Stargate Pioneer to not have as much of a potty mouth as he does.
Oh my, this means I have to put soap in my mouth?
Yes, absolutely. But let's go ahead and move on to the Better Podback. This week, we had a couple of tweets as well as an email, and our first tweet comes from the verified Cody Goff, which you can find at Producer Cody on Twitter.
Cody says, great list, but you missed at Better Pod. And what he is responding to is a tweet by at Bellow Collective saying, how much podcast could a podcaster podcast if a podcaster listened to podcasts about podcasts? Wow, that was a mouthful that I didn't quite get out, but you get the point there. Went to an article that basically talked about different podcasts that can help you podcast, like Better Podcasting, but we weren't included in the article. So producer Cody took upon it himself to say, you missed us. Yes, you did. And we're available for quotes if you want.
We also had, just as an FYI, we had a lot of response to last week's episode, a lot of back and forth. We're not going to go through and read all of the tweets right now, but a lot of people really liked hearing the different success stories. So to every single person that participated in last week's episode, there was a lot of response about it. And give yourself a pat on the back. And if you can't do that, SP will send you a GIF of him patting himself on the back.
Somebody's going to have to tell me how to send GIFs. Maybe I should contact technical support for that. We also received an email from Jonathan Bloom, and the title was Bad Ad Timing. Jonathan starts by saying, was listening to Swindled. I'm enjoying the show. Well, they did some bad dynamic ad insertion. 1, the ad repeated itself from the 1 at the beginning. 2, the narrator has me clinging to the spoon, dishing out dinner from my Wi-Fi crockpot, and I'm hanging on every word. Quote, the police followed the clues to the house. They found tips. There was a dead body in the freezer. We were about to find out what was there, and all of a sudden, hi, it's Jeremy from Progressive. He finishes off and he says, please, I love the show, but put your ads a bit more naturally in, not mid-paragraph.
First off, let's just say that we don't have dynamic ad insertion, but if we did, I would hope that it would be this sort of response, because this is hilarious. And this is everything that we've heard about with dynamic ad insertion in the podcast world, because the reality is that when you've got targeted ads like on your computer, there's a lot of money, and there's a lot of money spent on figuring out who you are so that you can be profiled, and then they can give you ads that are applicable to what you're reading and who you are. With podcasting, we've talked about statistics. It's still growing as far as popularity goes within the general public. So you don't have that sort of marketing base for them to be able to figure out all of these little nuances that makes dynamic ad insertion perfect, or not perfect, but better than this. Hi, it's Jeremy from Progressive. Got a dead body in your freezer? Call your insurance. Like, you know.
Or maybe, some brief musical transition back and forth would work too. And I would think that you'd want to be it specific to the podcast. In this case, you'd want suspenseful music just leading you out into the ad. In another podcast, you might want jovial transitions as it goes back and forth. If you're doing a podcast on Star Wars, you'd want majestic Star Wars style music taking you in and out. And then you can differentiate that you're listening to an ad versus you're listening to the story. And then Jeremy is the one who's the culprit. It's just hilarious to me.
It's funny. So thanks for sending that. And yes, you were swindled by Swindled. So there you go. We also had a YouTube comment from none other than the fantastic, the fabulous, the terrific, I couldn't think of another F word, Heather Welsh, that said, the Electro Voice RE16 was the mic that Bandrew used. Bonus point, the mic features in the Lighthouse radio station in the original movie, The Fog. So that's a really cool bonus point. And SP, you said that you would pick a winner.
I did. Well, the winner, there was only one response, by the way. So Heather, you've correctly identified the Electro Voice RE16, not 316, RE16. And so you get a prize, and I have talked to you about it offline. It was going to be a Better Podcasting mug, but since you already have a Better Podcasting mug, then that will be in the hopper for another brief giveaway that we do in the future, and I will get you something else. So we've already talked about that, and we'll figure it out. But thank you very much, Heather, for responding correctly, identified the microphone, and playing along with the contest. That once again was in Better Podcasting episode number 140.
And as an FYI, Bandrew, I prefer many other microphones on your voice, including your coveted Shure SM7B. It's a good fit for your voice, the SM7B.
You're just jealous.
Nope. Also, let's talk a little bit about where SP is going to be. That's right. SP is continuing to spread himself too thin, as usual. That's what he does. He does like 35 shows a week. He then guests on about 70 panels each week, and then also likes to write himself notes, fan feedback to all of the podcasts and the panels.
That's my very favorite part, is writing my own feedback. It's great. It's like writing your own review in the newspaper. It works great.
Or paying for podcast reviews. Whoops.
Right. Yeah, that too. Or it could be like interviewing yourself and then quoting yourself in the interview. That's also awesome as well. But what we're talking about is the Sunshine Summit 2018 Part 2, or August 2018. Heather Welsh from the Sunshine and Power Cuts podcast has put together another collaborative week that is going to take place from August 11th through August 17th. You can find all the information at sunshineandpowercuts.com/Sunshine Summit 2018. And I will be the opener for the closer. The closer is going to be Bandrew at 9 p.m. Eastern on the 17th of August. I will be opening for him at 7 p.m. and I will be streaming with Heather Welsh. So Heather, thank you very much for putting that on. Again, I'm very grateful and happy to be a part of your week again. And I can't believe I have the opportunity to open for a 70,000 YouTube subscriber individual in Bandrew. Yeah, that's the Podcast Stage YouTube channel. So I'm very grateful to be opening for him.
Well, very cool, SP. I'm glad you were able to do that. And if anybody wants to check this out, then go to geeks.link/sunshine. That's geeks.link/sunshine and be redirected over to the full URL. And if you don't know how to spell sunshine, for shame. Again, geeks.link/sunshine. That's going to go ahead and take us to the end of this show. Before we wrap up, we will remind you, we do stream this live usually on Wednesdays at 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, 5 o'clock p.m. Pacific Time at www.geeks.live. We usually have quite a bit of a chat room that's going around talking about what we're talking about, or even talking about things that are off base with what we're talking about. But today we had a lot of on-topic conversation and a couple of quick highlights. We had somebody named Newson7248. That's Newson 7248, which apparently no AMSR for me because they said that licking noise was the worst thing I've ever heard. Fair point. We also had Heather Welsh talk about a technical problem where she said, my SSL cert auto-renewed but didn't actually update that renewal, so my RSS feed didn't work, but tech support got it sorted out pretty quick. Fantastic. And we also had Seth Zillman say related to tech support, tech support. Those were the days, and I could feel him stabbing his own eyes out as he typed that.
It's kind of funny when you think about it. You know, when I grew up, working at fast food was like the job that nobody wanted to do. Well, tech support apparently is the job nobody wants to do in the 2010s. So things have changed.
For sure. And if you want to check us out, you can always find us at betterpodcasting.com. And while you're over there, check out some other amazing geeky shows on the Gonna Geek Network. There's a whole bunch of awesome geeky content on GonnaGeekNetwork.com. We have a lot of people there that like to talk about geekery, and you can always apply if you want at GonnaGeek.com/join. We do review applications, so there is a review process, but you can always apply there. And if you want to check out an episode of a Gonna Geek Network show, you should check out episode 25 of On the Bubble Podcast, which features none other than Josh Liston. And in episode 25, Josh talks about Sleepy Hollow. So check this out and more at GonnaGeekNetwork.com. SP, anything else that you want to plug or promote?
I would just like to say go over to the GonnaGeek.com network. We've got a bunch of other shows, including a new one coming shortly. So stay tuned.
Awesome. So for episode number 141 of Better Podcasting, I'm Stephen John Drew saying that I really, really, really hope Jason Bryant can give me some fashion tips.
And I'm SP saying, woohoo! Let's go out and get our belts. Whoa.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Better Podcasting. We want to hear from you. You can find all of our contact information at betterpodcasting.com. If you like the show, please consider giving us a 5-star review in iTunes. We encourage you to check out all of the other geeky podcasts available at GonnaGeekNetwork.com. This has been a Gonna Geek production. Thanks for listening, and we will see you again next week.
Especially if you're doing a therapy session with a psychiatrist.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and talk tech support. Here we go. Yeah, you were muted.